everybody, to another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. I'm your host, Brandon, and we're here with another topic discussion today. Michael is joining us for these as always. So how are you doing today, Michael?
Doing great. Coming at you live from the VA. How's everything going down there for you?
Oh yeah, Michigan's not bad. Starting to get a little bit warmer. It's been a crazy week, but it's not too bad.
Cool.
So looking forward to our discussion today. I think we're going to be talking about two emotions that they go together pretty well. Some differences, some similarities, but they intertwine a lot in our life. And so we're talking about guilt and shame today. And guilt is more of that, feeling of regret or remorse after an action or behavior. So, something happens or you do something and then you feel regret and remorse about it, and that kind of can pull you down or weigh you down at times. As shame is then more of that, it's more of a centered all around yourself and those feelings of unworthiness, or you don't deserve certain things in life, and you're just, you're telling yourself that you're not good enough for life or anything in life. So obviously, just hearing those two, they go together hand in hand in a lot of different ways. Actions can lead to guilt, and those overwhelming feelings of guilt or those certain actions sometimes then can pull you into shame and just feeling like you're not worthy. So I know these two topics have done a lot in my life. I have felt both of these many times, and some of them in the darkest moments of my life that I felt these two emotions. So kind of just like going into that conversation and looking at it a little bit, what are your thoughts on these two words and the way that they kind of go together and play off of each other as we go through life?
Yeah, absolutely. They are two things that are tough to combat as well. And I think they are very similar because they do go hand in hand. Whether it's something that you did do that you don't feel like you should have done, and then the feelings that ensue that you internalize that kind of make you feel like, wow, because I did that, now I'm definitely not going to be worth this, or I don't deserve to have maybe the family and kids that I have because I, had did a certain action. And I know a lot of times when it ties together, it's almost like a double whammy because you start feeling one and then the other one makes you feel bad about the other one. And then it's kind of a repeating cycle. So you can get caught up in a really negative cycle where you're just continuing to kind of internalize negative thoughts and emotions. And then to a point where, you're not sure what is up. And I know I've had that experience myself a few times in my life where I just wasn't happy with the decision I made. And I kind of just didn't know how to process it, felt guilty for it because it affected not just me. And then after that, just felt like I didn't even deserve to be around that person. And that's where gave me my first experience with it, where I just didn't know where to turn because it was kind of so new, but also I was so down from it internally. And so I can just understand that it was not fun time, and at the same time trying to realize what I can do, because there's two things that are not easy to cope with,
Yeah, and it just with what you ended there with not easy to cope with, I 100% agree with that. And I know those have been, some of the most difficult things I've dealt with, and some of the most, the hardest emotions that I remember feeling at times are guilt and shame, especially just in the, in some of the situations and circumstances I ended up with, and obviously in the drug world, there's certain things that happen or things that you do or moments that come about where it's really hard to process in the moment or at the time. So then you feel guilty and you use more drugs, and then you feel like a worthless piece of shit, so you use more drugs, and you that weight of guilt and shame can become so heavy. I know that's where I've had like my darkest thoughts about taking my own life or not wanting to live anymore, is just because the guilt and shame of something around me that has happened, or just my internal feelings were so bad about myself and the way I was living. I thought I would have been better off if I wasn't living. So I can think of a couple different situations where that was really prevalent in my life, and really kind of took hold. And I know one of the biggest ones, especially surrounding guilt, was when I lost a friend of mine OD'd, and it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever dealt with in my life. And I wasn't even there. I was in a different state, and he had OD'd, but we started using together. And so I felt a lot of guilt, and tied to that moment. And it spiraled me out of control really fast. I went, so when I was living in Georgia for a little bit, and I would get high and drunk all night and just cry and cry and cry until I passed out. And those feelings of guilt, feeling like, my actions at the time that we started using together led to that, led to that moment, where he passed away, even though I wasn't there in the moment or anything like that, but I hadn't seen him for about 6 months. But at the same time, that guilt just hit me so hard. And it's a long process, I think, to deal with that guilt, because that was about 12 years ago now, and there's moments where I deal with it better than others still. So I think it, not only can that carry with us for a long time, but it also kind of goes in ways with how we're able to handle it as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's a great point you made, because when you are trying to process it and understand, even if there was no fault in the moment, because they did it, but they started doing something with you. In that case, you guys started doing it together. And so as soon as something negative like that drastically happens, I can only imagine how I would feel as well. And I know for me, my experience was slightly different, but the result was very similar. I had a good friend of mine, similar type of thing. We, played soccer together though, so everything was cool. He was a little bit overweight, so a lot of the kids weren't really messing with him, but I thought he was cool. He's pretty good at soccer, so, we stayed friends. And then he got into, one night we were hanging out. I was like, hey man, I'm going to hang out with some soccer guys trying to smoke. He's like, cool, yeah, why not? First time. So he was cool, everything was fine. And then it just ended up leading up to where that gateway hit for him into drinking. And then he, was smoking and drinking all the time. And then there was a moment, I think there was a night he hit me up, and I was with somebody else, didn't answer the phone call, didn't really think much of it. And then the next morning, I heard that he had actually flipped his car over on the interstate and passed away. And it was just kind of shocking for me, because I couldn't process in the moment that, one, he was gone, but two, he had hit me up that night. Maybe that was the help cry, like, hey, I need you to come get me, whatever, what's up, and just not even to answer the phone call, to not even give it the time of day in that moment. While it not necessarily my fault, anything else specifically happened, I felt like I could have had a part to play in maybe saving a life that night. And it just really hurt me, and I didn't know really how to process that, because it was very, in a way, traumatizing for me, because I just saw the dude the day before that. We just played soccer, just hung out. To see that he was gone just like that was very troubling for me, and I didn't really know how to process it. And I know that I don't think I accepted it until I saw him, in the casket at the funeral. And it was just this very kind of self-realizing moment that doesn't really matter what day, time, or season it is. Anybody could be reaching out to you at any moment. And I think that's what I learned from that the most, is just answer that call, even if you're busy, or text, hey, what's up? Everything cool? Because I don't know, maybe that would have helped. And that's kind of where I was dealing with that type of guilt. And then it started making me feel like, man, I'm not there for my friends when I need them most. Why do I even deserve to be friends with them? And that started to hit me a little bit deeper. And that's kind of where I maybe started to pull away from hanging out with friends for a while, just because I couldn't really handle it myself.
Yeah, and that's such a tough thing, especially, in both of our circumstances involving like losing somebody, because then you don't get that conversation afterwards. I remember, my buddy had texted me the night before, and he told me, he had relapsed. And at the time I was still smoking and drinking. I'm pretty sure he was, but we were talking about, using a needle and hard drugs, and I was just like, yo, be careful, well, be careful. I didn't really, I'm pretty sure I was fucked up too as I was texting him. I remember texting him later that night, and I was like, "Yo, you good? Yo, what's up? What's up?" Nothing. And I passed out. I remember I woke up with just this really sick feeling, and I knew I was gonna get a call that day that wasn't gonna be good. And sure enough, one of our other friends had called me and told me what happened, and that, like you just said, I should have said something different in that moment, right? I should have done something different, and maybe there's a different outcome. And those thoughts start going through your mind, and for me, like I said, it's spiraled me out of control for a long time. And it's just it's a hard emotion to kind of move past. When you're feeling guilty about something that you feel like you could have changed. And I like how you started to tie that into, though, how next time maybe you try to answer that call, you try a little harder to answer that call, or maybe you try say or do something a little bit differently in that situation. So I think that's where sometimes I think guilt almost can become, we can use that at least in a positive way to start to motivate us to say, okay, this is where I messed up. I feel bad. I feel terrible. I have this negative, feeling about surrounding this action. I can do better next time. I can learn from this. I can do better. Whereas with shame, I don't think you get too many positives from that too often, because that's just like that deep seated, oh, I'm unworthy of this. And I think some actions, I know the action of that happening really built up that sense of shame in me. And just like, it went past that, oh, I feel really bad this happened. I feel like it's my fault, or I feel like I could have done something. It went to the point like, oh, I am the worst person in the world. And now I don't know if I deserve to live, because that shame started taking over my feelings, my thoughts, and my mind, and just telling me like, no, you don't deserve anything in life. You're unworthy of everything in life. You deserve exactly where you're at, sitting in a bed by yourself, with a bottle in one hand and a needle in the other, crying yourself to sleep, and that's where my mind would tell me like, oh yeah, you deserve this shitty situation that you're in right now. And so I think that's where that can be kind of, it can kind of differentiate. It can be a little different with those two things, when you start to like look at them and feel them in a different way.
Yeah, and while they are different words, I think that they can tie into the same emotion or how you feel about what it was that you did. In both of our situations, I know that we both had that feeling of being guilty of not doing something maybe we could have, and also the ensuing shame in a way that kind of like we just don't. I don't. At least I knew I was not. Didn't feel like I deserved friends because I wasn't there when one needed me the most, even if I didn't know that night that that's when he needed me most. I think that's the biggest thing that I have learned, and had that kind of positive result from the guilt to motivate me, because like you said, it's really about how we take it once something is dealt to us, and we can continue to internalize negative emotions and thoughts and create a more shameful feeling for us, and then that can cycle and have us stuck. Or we can use that specific experience to overcome that emotion, and then realize, yeah, that I lost one there, and while it's never going to be the same and I can't get that one back, I will do everything I can to prevent or eliminate another one from happening or going out the same way. And so for me, that's where I really tried to just focus on, if I get a phone call from one of my good friends at 2 in the morning, I might shoot it. I usually shoot a text real quick. Hey, everything cool? If I get another call right back, I'm answering the phone because something's up. And I'd rather just answer the phone, even if he's like, hey, man, I'm just freaking out. I need to talk to somebody. Because if you don't get a hold of me, you don't get a hold of your other friend, you don't get a hold of your brother, you don't get a hold of your parents, then what do you do? And that's where we don't know. And that's where I feel like as long as someone's reaching out to you, you have a chance to help. And that type of experience going through it, I think knowing that I don't want to feel, and nobody does, nobody wants to feel guilt about anything like that, especially losing somebody. And then nobody wants to tell themselves they're not worthy, but those are natural thoughts when stuff like that happens. So finding that balance and can be that transition to where, okay, something like that happened to you or happened to me, cool. Next time I have anybody, could be 2 a.m., 2 p.m., could be anybody that I just happen to know. All it takes, just say something a little bit more than I did, or just, hey, reach back out. Hey, I'm gonna call you in 5 minutes. Cool. That way, it's not just, hey, leave me alone. I'm hanging out with other friends, and then something could happen. It's nobody's fault that that happened, and I know that's where we kind of try to get to eventually, and that's what everybody will tell you, that it wasn't your fault that they did that. And while that's true, I still felt like you could have had, or I could have had, a moment that maybe did change the outcome, like you'd mentioned before.
Yeah, and I think that's where, that healing process takes us at times, right? And that's where I go back and forth about, that situation, maybe a couple others in my life where it's like, you know, well, this, you're not God. You don't get to control these outcomes. You don't get to make these decisions, and you can't control anybody else. Just like, I mean, I don't know how many people told me to stop using drugs, or to, change my life, or do this or do that. And every time, basically, I just stuck the middle finger in their face, and kept doing what I was doing. And so when I try to look at what happens around me through that lens, and realize, like, okay, I can't control other people. Nobody could control me. If I would have OD'd and died, I wouldn't want anybody else to feel that burden. In some of those different situations, I know that the two examples we gave are both pretty heavy and big. But even with some of those smaller things, like, maybe we make a decision to, cheat on a test, or, to tell a little lie, or to do something like that. Even those those small feelings of guilt can still be pretty big at times, and they can drive you crazy. And they can really mess with your head. Like, oh, I should have just owned up to that right in that moment. I should have just said that right then. Um, and so we try to get through that process of, okay, this is what happened. This is the action I chose. This is what I did. So now this is how I have to get better. This is how I have to grow in this. This is what I can do next time. And, for me, that process is really a back and forth at times. Sometimes I'm good with it, and I'm like, okay, I feel good today. I know I've messed up in the past, but I'm not going to let that guilt, drive me to make another decision I feel guilty about. Or I'm not going to let that guilt drive me to, have a bunch of self-pity that day, and not get anything done. Whereas in some days, that guilt's like, oh, it's really tugging on me, and I struggle to just kind of keep crawling through my day, as I would put it, when I feel those feelings. Um, so it's I think when it comes to, like, trying to heal and process those, you almost got to give yourself a break a little bit. You almost got to, have some self-compassion, and just really kind of take a step back and realize you're going to mess up, and then how are we going to handle those feelings from there?
Yeah, that's the a big key, I think, that most people try to get to, or maybe they don't realize that's what they need to get to. But that kind of stepping out of the situation and pulling yourself out in almost a third person type of view, like, what does this look like for someone outside of this whole situation? And then realizing that, yeah, it's something that I can't control. Like you said, we don't have control over anybody other than ourselves, and even sometimes ourselves we barely have control over. So for for a lot of people, that's the hard part, because it might have been your best friend that you guys were together in school. And one thing, maybe me and you as an example, where you left school and I didn't, and then is that nobody lost their life, but in a way you did, kind of, because you weren't there to do what you'd set out to do a year before: get a 4 year degree, play college soccer for 4 years, go further, possibly even, depending on where it took us. But it was kind of cut short, and that's where I also feel like, dang, man, that was my homie. We didn't really do much other than chill. But had I maybe thought about that, had that foresight ahead of time, that, hey, look, man, we probably should just get off of this for a few days. Like, let's go to practice. Let's remember why we're here. But we were just so in it, we didn't really care. And I'm glad that now we're here to reconnect and do that, because a lot of times you don't get that second opportunity. You don't get a chance to, especially with someone that you knew so long ago, to be able to share and see that, okay, cool, they've come a long way and made it to a point in their life, same as me, and then been able to go into why they went through things, or how they went through things. And I know there was also another time where, I think it was just lying to someone for an extended period of time that I got that kind of feeling like I can't be around anybody that I know or that person knows, because I just feel that it's like I was so shameful, basically, just to put that direct word out there, because I didn't want to look at them. I didn't want them to see me. I didn't want to know that I existed, that they existed. I was just terribly, and I just didn't know how to handle that either, because then it just forced me to pull away again. And that's where I think the biggest thing I took from that is I don't, I can't say that I've, lied at all in the past 10 years, other than if it's just a little lie to myself, like to get myself up. Hey, I know this sucks. You're going to get through this, a little bit of fake it till you make it for my personal well being, because sometimes you have to force yourself to get through those things. And that's where, for me, I'm grateful, because I learned that, hey, it's that feeling was a direct result of me doing that, which was in that case lying. I don't want to feel that again. I don't want that to be the sole center of my universe and have me going to sleep at night wondering why, or am I a bad person every day because I'm not doing something, or because I did something for so long. And so that's where that application of the knowledge and pulling yourself out can really help you make sure the next time anything like that happens, you don't repeat it, and you can kind of be aware of when you might get sucked into it without realizing it, so you can prevent something like that from affecting you again.
Yeah, and just to hit on something else you said there with like shame and not wanting to be around people and not wanting to see certain people's face and be caught up. I know, like, I've experienced that at a lot of different points in my life of just sometimes it wasn't even always like a terribly wrong action. Maybe it was something like, oh yeah, maybe I did tell a lie, or maybe I just didn't show up when I was supposed to, or something like that. And then I had just this overwhelming feeling of shame, like, oh, I messed up. I'm just this terrible person that doesn't deserve this opportunity because I blew it today. I blew it today, and so I can't take it tomorrow. So then I mess up tomorrow too, and then that shame just keeps me starting to isolate more, and started to pull myself back more, and started to keep myself in my own little area, because I don't want to look anybody in the eye. I don't want anybody to see me and be like, oh, what's up? What happened? And I just that because that it just that shame like really really pulls me down and makes me feel stuck. Really puts me in that depressive state, that anxiety state of where I don't want to be out and about because I don't want to run into somebody I knew from the previous life I've had, or from any of those things. And so, like, I think dealing with those two emotions, we have to find ways that we can rewire our thinking and readjust our perspective on ourselves at times, and give ourselves some of that grace, and change the way we talk to ourselves, right? I mean, all those kind of things, and we've even talked on some of these things before in the past couple of weeks, but all those things kind of really put into play to heal from some guilt and to heal from shame, and so that way we don't let those two emotions take away what we have in life. Because I know if I've got stuck in my shame, I'd lose my family. If I got stuck in my shame, I'd lose my opportunities. I'd lose my my job, or this opportunity, or talking to you again, and I wouldn't be able to build anything again. And so I have to say, okay, like, yeah, you've messed up before, but you just have to keep going. You can do this. You're probably going to mess up again. That's going to be okay. We're human, but you're trying to do the right thing. And I think sometimes as long as we keep that in our mind, because we are human, we're going to mess up. As long as we know in our mind and in our hearts, like, I really am trying to do the right thing right now. It's not easy. It's not going to be a day process or a week process or a month process. But if you can have that feeling that I am really trying to do the right thing right now, it can make those feelings of guilt and shame a little bit easier, because then you're trying to respond and rebound from those negative things in your life too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I want to touch on specifically how when you said rewire the brain, I like that, because that makes perfect sense, because your brain up to that point is wired a certain way to think or respond to anything in this certain sense, guilt and shame, the same way. When you can rewire it to, now let's adjust how I react. Even if I get dealt a similar situation, can I do something different so I do get a different outcome this time around, so I don't, I guess, elicit those feelings that are associated with that type of action. And I think that once we start to really find what it is that we can do, and I think a lot of it does start with kind of our perception of ourself, that self idea of who we are and how we are is the determining factor in how we talk to ourselves. And if we want to change how we talk to ourselves, we kind of have to change how we view ourselves. And I know that can be a difficult part when you are used to feeling those remorseful feelings of actions you did or you were a part of and don't know how to really get around those feelings. Like you said, everybody's going to make mistakes. We're all, at the end of the day, born to learn from our actions. So we make a mistake, we learn from it. We do something wrong, we learn from it. As long as we don't keep doing the same things wrong and the same things over and over again that would put us in a similar situation, it's growth. And I think that's the focus. We try to find a little bit of growth every day. And even if you feel it, like we've felt it before, even I had maybe a year ago, just kind of, it was that person's birthday, because I still had a notification on my phone, and it just kind of brought me back down for a few minutes where I was just like, man, just the negative emotions kind of came through. Some of that, man, I remember exactly how I felt, but it didn't pull me down to where I was like, man, I just need to isolate for 3 days. I just remembered how negative that made me feel and how I'm going to make sure, kind of reinvigorate my whole approach to make sure that I'm not going to let anything like that happen if I can help it. And while it's not in our control to help someone else's decisions, if they reach out, then I'll be there. And that's where I'm trying to focus my being as good of a friend as possible, because there have been a few nights where my best friend called me, locally, like 1 a.m. It popped me up. I was like, maybe he didn't mean to call me. Maybe it was just a late night thing. 2 seconds later, second call, instant answer, 2.5 hour phone call because he was dealing with something. And it's just one of those where while I had work in 3 hours, and none of that was relevant because a life was at stake, in the sense of if I didn't answer that phone call, who knows where he would have turned and what he would have maybe tried to do to get some type of remedy. And if nobody answered, then what? So that's where transitioning to believing in yourself that you're still a good person, even if you have experienced some of the most negative things in your life. If you believe yourself to want to do good, to want to be good, you are good. But at the same time, if you believe yourself to not want to be good, tell yourself you're not good, unfortunately, you won't be good. And I think that's the hardest part for ourselves, because it's a lot easier to take that road of least resistance by just saying the negative things and then living in that. And then in your situation, nights where you just basically cried yourself to sleep, or no, I refuse to let this be me anymore. It's been me for as long as it can be. I know I'm going to have days that suck, but I don't have to live in those moments and let that define me. And that's the biggest transition for me personally, because otherwise I would still be feeling like that probably every day.
Yeah, and not living in that misery. I still remember I lived in a trailer at the time. And I really feel like this was one of the darkest periods of my life. This one, and then right before I got clean. But I was living in a trailer, and there was like this like little room in the back that I was sleeping in, or I was living with my brother and one other person at the time, and whoever kind of went back there first would get to bed. We pass out on the floor or on the couch, just wherever usually. Because really it was just a house of emotional wrecks at the time, with everybody lost and just getting messed up all the time. But I remember spending like a week back there, just bottles and pills and cigarettes, and that's just, it was so miserable. And I remember calling people at different times and crying to them, and some people saved my life, like you just said. I remember specifically one or two people that I ended up calling, those nights that saved my life, and just talk to me and let me cry, let me vent. And those things can make a difference, but that was me living in my shame and living with shame and guilt and letting that just control my life. Whereas now, that notification antidote you just gave of that popping up. There's a song by Eminem, called "You're Never Over." I don't know if you heard that one. It's a good song though. Go check it out if you haven't. But when that song comes on, my Pandora or whatever, or I'll play it on YouTube sometimes, I'll cry because it reminds me of my buddy. and I'll get emotional and everything, but it's about losing them and then not letting, showing the world like what you're worth, and that losing him isn't going to ruin his life. And and so I'll cry when I hear that song. I remember one time I'm driving to a game, when I was coaching soccer, and this song comes on. I think I was working a night shift at the time, so I was already sleep deprived. And this song's on. I'm bawling my eyes out driving to this tournament that I was about to be at all day. And I was just like, it was so, I was an emotional wreck, but I don't have to let those negative feelings take over my day. And that's what some of those moments help me realize it. Like, yeah, I'm thinking about this. And although at one point in my life when I thought about this, I wanted to end my life. Now when I think about this, I feel it. I process that pain that I may still have. I process that guilt or that shame I may still have. But then I keep going. And I keep trying to be better. Like you said earlier, you try to be better. You try to grow each time in those moments. And that's what we have to do. And some days are going to be a little harder than others. And I think that self-compassion and that self-love can come into play when it comes to dealing with these emotions. I know for me, therapy was a big one to deal with these two emotions. Talking to a therapist, counselor, and really working through some of that stuff was a huge process in helping me, learn some different tools and recover. So if that is something you're dealing with, don't shut that idea out, because those feelings can be so powerful. Sometimes you need some guidance through, those thoughts, emotions, and feelings. But I think that's what we need to do a little bit when it comes to that. Look at the growth you can have. Look at the different ways you can show some self-compassion. That's gonna be our wellness challenge this week. So check that out on Friday. But those different ways we can do that and tie that into our life, so that way that guilt and shame doesn't destroy us and take us over. Because to me, those are two of the most powerful negative emotions that I've felt in my life, and I feel like they can be very controlling if we let them.
Yeah, that is the absolute truth. No matter what you're going through or what you're trying to do, you could be on the path of resilience and getting yourself back on track, and those types of feelings can be an anchor that just pulls you back down to rock bottom. And it's not a situation you ever want to be in, of course, but at the same time, like you are able to do now, and myself included, is recognize when those feelings are hitting and not letting it consume us. We are now in control of how we respond to those types of feelings, these powerful as they might be, where you had that song where you just break down and you kind of have to let that emotion out in the form of tears. But knowing now that that's actually healthy to let that out, because it's something that we went through that was very traumatic, and it was an experience that we'll never forget. And to ignore it would actually be, the negative thing to do. But being able to accept what had happened, like you said, and like we've both been saying, find the step forward that you can take to navigate that forward. Because sometimes the hardest part is wading into that a feeling. Okay, I feel it. I'm trying to not let it consume me, but I just don't know how not to, or I'm not sure what I need to do. And like you said, that can be where reach out to somebody. If it has to be specific guidance in the form of a therapist, then 100%. I had to recently myself had to seek some guidance. It was a year ago this month actually, where I just kind of had some stuff going on in my life and I didn't know how to turn, and a lot of it was related to kind of how I was performing at work too. So a little bit of that guilt, like I had just been hired for this position. I interviewed great. They knew what to expect from me, my previous experience, and then I was just like dropping the ball. I just wasn't really, because I wasn't there mentally at home or at work. So I had to take a leave of absence for a month and a half and get a therapist and talk to them once a week to really find what works for me in recovery for that specific feeling, because everybody's is going to be different. We could be feeling the same thing, both of us, and how we respond or how our treatment goes to get better can be completely different. We might get to the same goal as we are now. We're able to talk about it and really, as the channels, just radiate that emotion of positivity and learning and let people know, hey, we went through this. We're wanting to share it with you. So if you're going through it now, or if you already went through it, you could join in and help other people or help yourself. That's where I was getting to the stage of at the end of that therapy session where I realized, okay, I'm not this negative person that I guess I've been convincing myself I am. I'm not worthless, even though I haven't done much yet at work. I kind of had to remember, and I think sometimes we lose sight of what got us to where we are in the first place in terms of the good things. I am really good at what I do. I had a great resume leading up to that moment when I did apply for that position. So I know I'm good at that. So get that out the way. That's not the issue. Get this right. Get myself on a mental path where I know, okay, I'm not going to feel that type of shame where I'm not worthy of the position I just got because of XYZ. Find a way that I need to cope with that. And it's different for everybody. For me, you know, a lot of it's just doing fun things again and not really focusing on that so much, and finding the people I can be around when those emotions do hit that are there in a supportive manner that'll let me kind of vent to them, or I can be that person where or they can be that person like a shoulder to lean on so that I can kind of just let it out. And just having that support has helped me tremendously, because there have been times where that's the main thing that's helped me been able to keep pushing through and not have that be a 2 or 3 or day episode where I'm out of it. I had the family support. I was able to reach out to people, remember kind of some of the tools that I had been taught when I was going through that therapy session. And that's where my life started really turning back around to where I'm at today, because I've got a handle on most of those emotions of negativity and can kind of flip that switch to make it positive, or at least an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, and I really, you know, as we kind of get close to wrapping up, I want to hit back to something you just said that I think is really important, and that's that, you know, we can be going through the same emotion, we could be feeling that same emotion. It's going to look different for me than it does for Michael. It's going to look different for me than it does for you, and you know, or even if it does look the same, our process to recovery, our process to getting better could be 100% different. You know, one of us might just need to sleep for an extra half hour and then, you know, eat something good when we wake up and then we're feeling better. The other one might take 6 months of therapy, maybe medication and that type of stuff, and then we're feeling better. But I really want to stress the importance of, if something doesn't work, don't give up. Find something else. Try something else. You know, that's the thing with this stuff. Even something that's worked for you before might not work for you anymore, might not give you those positive feelings. And that's where you have to switch up your toolbox. You know, if you're doing something 10 years ago, maybe now you're not the same person. So maybe now it's going to take something different to keep that recovery moving forward. And so, you know, I think that's a big thing, you know, that take away from this episode, or even any point of your time listening to me and Michael. But give yourself options, and don't give up on yourself too early. Don't give up on yourself before you see that change that you've been looking for. You know, just because that one thing didn't work, try another. 10 things don't work, try 11. If 100 things don't work, try 101. Until you find what's going to work for you, keep pushing that, keep trying, because when you can recover and you can feel good about yourself and you can look in the mirror and not feel that shame, you can look other people in the eyes and not feel that guilt. That's what you want to be able to do at the end of the day. So we really appreciate your time. Like I said, you know, our wellness challenge this week on Friday is really going to tie into some of this with the self-compassion. So make sure you come back on Friday, check us out, you know, throw us a like and subscribe. But we really, you know, we're really grateful for having you today. Michael, thanks for joining us as always.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to be here. Everybody, just remember that if you have that approach towards just, if whatever doesn't work, try another one, you'll get through it, because you're always trying to do better. So let's focus on doing better. And I know that this wellness challenge this week will help do that too. So definitely check us out.
Exactly. So this has been another episode of Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your day.